Hey everyone! Ever heard about the Hyksos? Let me tell you, they're one of the most misunderstood groups in ancient history, and their story is pretty fascinating. Around 1782 BCE, a group of Semitic people called the Hyksos settled in Egypt, specifically in a city called Avaris in the Nile Delta. This marked the beginning of a unique era in Egyptian history called the Second Intermediate Period. Their name, hekau khasut, which means rulers of foreign lands, was later simplified by the Greeks to Hyksos. Now, contrary to some dramatic old tales, these folks didn't storm in like a Hollywood invasion. Instead, they likely started as traders, welcomed by the Egyptians. They prospered in Avaris and called in more of their community, eventually building enough strength to gain political and military power. Over time, they controlled parts of Lower Egypt during a period when the Egyptian government, weakened by some bad decisions, had left this region vulnerable. Here's the thing though, later Egyptian scribes, and even some modern interpretations, paint the Hyksos as invaders who tore through Egypt, destroying everything in their path. But there's no solid evidence for that. Instead, they adapted Egyptian culture, embraced local traditions, and even worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own, like Baal and Anat. Their rule wasn't about chaos, it was more like integration with a twist of power play. What's super interesting is how their story got twisted over time. An Egyptian writer named Manetho, centuries later, misunderstood the name Hyksos, thinking it meant captive shepherds, which was picked up by historians like Josephus. This sparked theories about them being connected to the Hebrews in the biblical story of Exodus. But honestly, there's no evidence for that. They spoke a Semitic language, sure, but they weren't slaves, and their actual origins remain a mystery. The Hyksos didn't conquer all of Egypt either. Their influence was mostly in Lower Egypt, and cities like Zois even maintained their independence while trading with them. Even Thebes, seen as the stronghold of Egyptian resistance, had diplomatic and trade relations with them for a while. Their rule, officially the 15th dynasty, brought trade and economic prosperity to many parts of Egypt. One of their famous leaders, Apepi, also known as Apophis, has an intriguing legacy. His name, associated with the serpent god of chaos, might have been a later attempt to villainize him. Yet, there's no evidence he was a tyrant or a destroyer. And while the Hyksos were gaining power up in northern Egypt, something similar was happening down south with the Nubians. The Egyptians had really dropped the ball by not securing their borders. The once mighty Middle Kingdom was now split. Thebes in Upper Egypt found itself stuck between the rising Hyksos in the north and the growing power of the Nubians in the south. But oddly enough, Thebes and Avaris, the Hyksos stronghold, managed to coexist for a while. Trade flourished between these two cities and even extended to the Nubian capital, Kush. It wasn't all chaos yet. Things took a turn when the Hyksos king, Apepi, sent what some might call a rather strange and provocative message to the Theban king, Seqenenre-Ptah, also known as Tau. According to the story passed down by the writer Manetho, Apepi demanded that Thebes get rid of its hippopotamus pool because, get this, the noise was keeping him up at night all the way in Avaris. It's hard to say if this tale is true or if it's just some ancient shade-throwing. Either way, Tau didn't take it lightly. Instead of complying, he saw this as a direct challenge to his authority and decided to take action. Tau marched his forces north, but things didn't go as planned. His mummy tells the story of his end. He died in battle, likely during this failed confrontation with the Hyksos. But his fight wasn't in vain because his son, Kamos, picked up where he left off. Kamos was fed up with the whole situation, as seen in his inscriptions where he rants about paying taxes to the Asiatics and having foreigners on both sides of his land. He launched a ferocious attack on the Hyksos. According to his accounts, he wreaked so much havoc on Avaris that he claimed even the Hyksos women became sterile out of sheer terror. But let's be real, this was probably a bit of ancient propaganda. Avaris wasn't completely destroyed. and the Hyksos still held on to Lower Egypt for a few more years after Kamos's campaign. Kamos's work was finished by his younger brother, Ahmose. He's the one who finally drove the Hyksos out of Egypt. Ahmose's inscriptions, along with the account of a soldier named Ahmose, son of Ibana, describe the final battle at Avaris. The city was destroyed, and the surviving Hyksos fled to Sharuhin in what is now Palestine. But Ahmose didn't let up. He laid siege to Sharuhin for 6 years, forcing the Hyksos to flee even farther north to Syria. And just like that, their story in Egypt came to an end, leaving their ultimate fate shrouded in mystery. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Hyksos left behind a legacy that changed Egypt forever. Ahmose's victory didn't just mark the start of the new kingdom. It also spurred the creation of a professional Egyptian military. Determined to prevent another foreign power from ever gaining such influence, the pharaohs of the new kingdom expanded Egypt's borders and maintained a buffer zone around their territory. This shift in strategy laid the groundwork for Egypt's rise as a powerful empire. But the Hyksos weren't just seen as enemies, they were also innovators. They brought game-changing technologies to Egypt, like the composite bow, horse-drawn chariots, bronze weapons, and advanced tools for farming and craftsmanship. Their improvements in irrigation, metalworking, and textile production had a lasting impact on Egyptian society. Even their introduction of the vertical loom elevated the quality of Egyptian linen. Interestingly, the Hyksos didn't just innovate, they also preserved Egypt's past. Under Apip's rule, old papyrus scrolls were copied and carefully stored, ensuring their survival for future generations. And while the New Kingdom scribes vilified the Hyksos as barbaric invaders in their stories, this narrative fueled Egyptian nationalism like never before. The belief that Egypt had to protect itself from future invasions became a driving force behind the empire's expansion. In the end, the Hyksos were more than just outsiders, they were agents of change. Their presence pushed Egypt into a new era, blending chaos with progress in ways no one could have predicted.